Fairmont Crest has always run on a ruthless unspoken code. Every tragedy must be wrapped in expensive perfume. Every collapse must happen behind closed doors. And every victim must believe they fell on their own rather than being pushed. That night, when Shanice stepped out of Ted's room, she wasn't simply leaving a relationship or a flash of impulsive jealousy. She was walking away from the epicenter of an explosion that had been wired to detonate long ago. In the corridor, the soft golden lighting that should have felt safe turned into stage lights, illuminating the one thing she feared most, the sickening sense that she had just done exactly what someone wanted her to do. Somewhere in a shadowed corner, a camera might have flashed, a pair of eyes might have recorded the moment her back turned, or a hand might have quietly sent a message, done, to someone with far more power. And if that sexy dress was only bait, then what was hidden beneath it was the kind of thing that could destroy a family, shatter a career, or worse, turn Shanice into the one who carries the blame for someone else's crime before she even understands. When she stepped into the game, Shanice walked as if she were running, yet each step grew heavier because her anger had nowhere to land. Her rage wasn't aimed only at Ted, it was aimed at herself, too, because she hated being played more than she hated betrayal. The dress was too obvious, too perfectly timed, too flawless to be proof. The evidence was so polished it felt suspicious, like lipstick deliberately smeared beside a signature on a contract, as if someone wanted people to look there first, believe that first, judge that first. Shanice forced herself toward the easiest storyline. Ted was tired of her. Ted had cheated. Ted had found someone new. But the harder she tried to believe it, the colder her spine became, because Ted hadn't acted like a man caught, not a flicker of panic, not one clumsy reflex to hide. Only that unnerving calm, the calm of someone who knew this moment was coming and was ready to let it happen. Shanice remembered the times Ted appeared when she was at her weakest, the questions that sounded like care but drilled into details that didn't matter, the way every time she tried to move deeper into his world, a sudden crisis dropped like a wall in her path. She used to call it fate or the pressure of life. Now she began to name it properly. An invisible hand was setting the tempo of her emotions. While anger pushed Shanice forward like an open wound, Ted stood still amid ruins he refused to let show. People assume the guilty are afraid and the unfaithful are frantic. But Ted carried a different kind of fear, deeper and more dangerous. The fear of someone who knows he's being watched, who knows he's trapped between forces that can take everything with a single misstep. His composed gaze, the one that made Shanice feel insulted, wasn't necessarily brazen shamelessness. It was a mask worn so long the skin beneath had hardened. If Ted truly was staging a performance, was it driven by lust or by survival? If he was innocent, why didn't he shatter the script immediately? Those questions struck his mind like heated nails. He couldn't run after Shanice the way a lover would, because any pleading move could become the wrong signal, a crack for the puppeteer to exploit. Ted understood that what Shanice had seen wasn't truth, it was truth deliberately twisted, and the most painful part was that Shanice had reacted exactly as they wanted, cutting the cord with her own hands, walking away with her own feet, turning herself into the impulsive, jealous woman in the story Fairmont Crest was already preparing to tell. The rumors ignited so fast Shanice felt dizzy, as if the entire community had been waiting to chew her name to pieces. Half pitying, half contemptuous looks landed on her in luxurious hallways and in encounters that seemed accidental, but all stabbed at the same point. She had left Ted because of another woman. No one asked if she was sure. No one asked if she wanted to explain. Fairmont Crest didn't love truth, it loved drama and fast conclusions. Shanice felt stripped naked in public by the invisible blade of opinion. Her anger shifted from hot to cold. She began to see the narrative operation at work. Someone had planted the story in the right place, with the right people, at the right time. Someone had chosen the exact label to stamp her into a type of woman society finds easiest to condemn. And inside that anger, Shanice felt something even more terrifying. If they could control the way people saw her in a single night, They could control her entire life with one well-aimed lie. That fury drove Shanice to do the one thing she had sworn she wouldn't: go back, not to apologize, not to beg, but to save herself from the sensation of being toyed with. She returned like someone reclaiming a soul she had dropped, and also like a desperate person running into a burning house to retrieve the only proof she wasn't losing her mind. Ted's room was still clean in the way the wealthy prefer, so clean that every stain would look intentional, and that very cleanliness became the sign. Shanice looked around, clinging to the smallest details: a perfume scent that didn't match anyone she knew, a stray hair on the chair, too perfect as if placed, and most of all, a strange emptiness beneath the soft fabric everyone would assume was merely a provocative prop. She reached in, and what she found wasn't a forgotten woman's accessory, but something with destiny written all over it. A second phone locked behind a passcode, or an access card stamped with numbers tied to areas outsiders weren't supposed to enter, or a hastily scribbled note with a meeting time and an initial that could be lethal if read the right way. Shanice froze. She understood she had touched the core of the game, and from that moment on, she was no longer the woman being staged for a love scandal. She was the woman who had seen what she was never meant to see. From Ted's side, the loss unfolded differently. He realized Shanice had come back, and instead of relief, he was swallowed by a quiet panic. Everything he had tried to arrange, if he truly had arranged it, served one purpose: to push Shanice away. Not because he was bored, not because of cheap betrayal, but because staying close to him meant Shanice was placing her neck into a tightening noose someone else was pulling. Ted had lived too long in compromise, too long smiling on cue and saying the right words to keep his position inside Fairmont Crest's power structure. But this time he could no longer control the fallout. Shanice had taken one more step, and that step could drag them both off a cliff. Ted suddenly saw the price of the secrets he carried. They didn't only steal his love, they stole his ability to remain a decent human being, and that was what enraged him. Not anger at Shanice, but anger at himself for letting things get this far. Shanice began investigating, not like a detective, but like a woman shoved to the wall by humiliation and survival instinct. She retraced every detail: who told her to come, who knew her schedule, who could enter Ted's space without raising suspicion, and who would profit if she walked away. The deeper she dug, the more suffocating the connections became. A contract about to be signed right after the breakup. A sum of money moved through a fund she'd once heard Ted mention as casual small talk. A private meeting in a place not meant for outsiders, scheduled precisely while she was being crushed by public judgment. Shanice realized her leaving wasn't just emotional shock, it was a marker meant to trigger other mechanisms, like a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for years. She began to believe she had been chosen from the start, not for love, but for convenience. Close enough to hear, intimate enough to be questioned, trusting enough to be exploited, and easy enough to smear to serve as the perfect smokescreen. In her anger, Shanice also faced her most painful truth. She had wanted to believe in Ted because she needed something to hold on to in a world where everything has a price. Her faith, once a point of pride, proof Fairmont Crest hadn't turned her cold, had become the opening through which she was manipulated. She remembered the tender moments that once softened her, and now every one of them felt suspicious, like a scene carefully directed. Her loss wasn't only losing a man, it was losing the ability to trust that her feelings had ever been real. Shanice hated Ted, then hated herself for still wanting a reason to believe he wasn't entirely cruel. That contradiction drove her toward madness. If Ted was simply a betrayer, revenge would be simple. But if Ted was trapped in something bigger, she would have to make the hardest decision of all: save him, or save herself. Fairmont Crest didn't give her time to think. Danger signals began to appear like warnings, a silent call that lasted just long enough for her to hear breathing, an unfamiliar car parked near her home, and then vanishing. The creeping sense of being watched on roads that should have felt safe. Her fury turned into fear, but it was the kind of fear that makes people ruthless in order to survive. Shanice began to react in the exact negative ways power games tend to create. She trusted no one. She was willing to hurt others, just to keep distance, and she was ready to trade someone's reputation if it meant dragging the truth out of darkness. She knew she was being cornered, and in a corner, people rarely choose what is right, they choose what keeps them alive. Ted, too, was trapped in his own corner. Either let Shanice be destroyed to protect something greater, or break the rules and accept being crushed. He began losing sleep, losing control, his anger turning dangerous, because he had nowhere to pour it. He raged at whoever planted the prop in his room, at the system that had turned him into a tool, at Shanice for coming back at the worst possible moment, but most of all, at himself for believing he could control everything with a few clever moves. There were moments Ted realized he had lost Shanice permanently, not because she left, but because she had been forced to see a version of him she could no longer love. And Ted's greatest loss wasn't love, it was the feeling that he was still a good man in his own story. When Shanice finally fitted the last pieces together, the real shock hit like a storm. The sexy dress wasn't there to prove Ted's betrayal, it was there to hide what lay beneath it, and to turn Shanice into the one who walked away at the exact right time. Someone wanted her out of Ted's line of sight, or wanted Ted free to execute a deal, or wanted Shanice discredited, so that if she ever spoke up, no one would believe her. Shanice realized she was facing a choice that made her throat tighten with rage: stay silent to live, or speak out and die slowly. If she went public, she would be framed as a scorned woman seeking revenge. If she stayed quiet, she would live with the knowledge that she had let evil win. And in that moment, she saw the harsh truth clearly. In Fairmont Crest, people aren't killed only by guns or knives, they are killed by the stories others tell about them. Shanice had already had her story stolen once. This time, her anger and pain were no longer chasing love or a vague sense of justice. They were chasing the right to exist without being turned into a pawn. And as she clenched the evidence she had found, she understood the road ahead would not be a war with Ted alone, it would be a war against an entire system that had chosen her as its victim long before she ever realized she had stepped into the trap.